Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Life in Motion. I'm your host, Grace Becker. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and an enthusiast of life. And I'm so happy to have you all back with me this beautiful Thursday for another episode. So my editor is currently out and I had to put on my big girl pants and I had to do this one all on my lonesome, edit it all on my lonesome. And this just reminds me why I'm so thankful for my editor, because I have been struggling this episode. I recorded it once already and my feedback did not come good. So I had to do it again. But, take two. Take two. It's all good. Better than ever. We're coming back better and stronger than ever. But I have with me, if you can hear it, but for those who can see it, I have my humongous girl dinner wine glass. It's like huge. Look, it's like the size of my hand. No comment. No comment. Nobody comment in the club. But yeah, and in this wine glass, I have kombucha, however you pronounce it. I wanted to try something a little different. I normally get the Synergy kombucha. I love that mango one or the guava goddess. Ooh, I love those. But I got the Health Aid this time. I got two different flavors. This one is the Pink Lady kombucha. Not my fave. I don't love it, but it's okay. And another one that I did get that I absolutely love is their blueberry and pomegranate one. Oh, I might have to get that one again. But let me take a quick sip. Since I did already record this, my mouth might be a little dry because I just got done therapizing for a day and I talk a lot when I'm therapizing. My job is to talk. And then I am recording 2 episodes today, I guess, instead of just the one. But it's all good. I'm happy you're all here with me. And yeah, I hope life has been good for you all lately. I was thinking about what episode I wanted to record for today, and the way that I come up with episodes really depends. Sometimes I'll come up with them when I'm maybe working with a client or I'm talking to a friend or someone in my family, and I'll just randomly have a thought, or I'll be talking about a skill in therapy and I'm like, oh, that would actually be a good podcast episode. So today we're going to be talking about distorted thinking. Clap, 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 clap. Everybody claps in the club. So the reason I wanted to get into distorted thinking is because I was talking about it with somebody the other day, and it's something that I catch myself doing all the time that I'm trying to be more mindful about correcting. And it's something that I help a lot of clients with as well. So I thought, you know what, if there's so many people, if I'm also struggling with this personally, I'm sure there's those of you who can maybe relate to this episode, and hopefully I can help you out with some of the distorted thinking. So to kind of hook you in and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, I have a question for you. My question is, do you ever catch yourself thinking something like, I'm always a mess. I always mess things up. I'll never be good enough. I'm a failure. If it's not perfect, then it's a complete fail. Do you ever do that? Sometimes I do too. And I'm the queen of overthinking. So these kind of thoughts got me thinking, why do our brains do that? Why do our brains seem to trick us into believing those things, right? Because we'll have the thought and then we'll stick with it. We'll think, oh my gosh, because this happened, what if this happens? Oh, they don't love me anymore. Oh, I missed 10 points off of that exam. I'm a failure now. And our brains will actually trick us into believing that these thoughts are truth, when often they're really not. So we're going to be getting into distorted thinking. And in exploring that, we're going to be exploring the different thought patterns. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common distortion types, relate it back to some other diagnoses such as anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. And something to keep in mind as we're going through all this is that distorted thinking impacts not only the individual, but it can impact our work life. It can impact our social life, our relationships, our decision making, our mental health. It really it really can affect all sorts of areas in our life. So as you're going through and you're listening to this episode, I encourage you to reflect on maybe how some of these things might be showing up in your life. And then when I give tips on how to challenge these distorted thinking types, I encourage you to reflect on, okay, if this is the distortion type that I use when I'm at work or when I'm talking to my partner, how can I counteract that? How can I challenge it? And I'm going to give you tips on how to do that. But just something to kind of be thinking about as we're going through this episode. So let's just get right into it. So what even is distorted thinking? So distorted thinking refers to patterns of thought that are either irrational, inaccurate, exaggerated, or are just leading to negative emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And when I'm explaining distorted thinking to people, I always come down to this therapy modality called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, there is the foundation, which is called the cognitive triangle. And I'm holding up a triangle right now. And in this triangle, in the therapy modality, it kind of talks about how a person's thoughts are connected to their feelings and their feelings are connected to their behavior. So it's just kind of a way of explaining that they're all interconnected, right? The things that we think affect how we feel, which affect how we behave. The way we behave affects our thoughts, which in fact impacts our feelings. They're all interconnected, right? They can influence each other. So you can see how if you have a irrational thought and irrational thought, that it can influence maybe a more negative emotion, such as guilt or shame. And then it can lead to behavior that's not helpful, such as shutting down, crying, maybe self-harm sometimes, right? It can lead to self-harm for people. It can lead to all sorts of behavior, thoughts, and emotions that are not helpful for us. The great news is, though, is that you can challenge it, and there are ways to take that negative triangle, that negative cycle, and transform it into a positive, productive triangle or cycle. So let's get into it a little bit deeper. The thing about distorted thinking is that it is linked to all sorts of mental health diagnoses. It's linked to anxiety, depression. It can be linked to PTSD. It can be linked to borderline personality disorder, all spectrums of things, ADHD, ASD, all kinds of things. Distorted thinking does not discriminate, and it can influence all sorts of issues within our lives. So I did break it down into kind of 3 categories in the way that I explained some of these distorted thinking types. So just kind of a precursor and as to how I'm going to explain this. 1, there are so many distorted thinking types. The ones that I list in today's episode is not the full extent of all sorts of types that there are. There are so many. The other thing that how I'm going to explain it, I'm going to explain it comorbidly with diagnoses. So example, I'm going to explain different distorted thinking types and how that might show up in a person with anxiety, or how different distorted thinking types might show up in a person with depression or with self-esteem issues. However, just because I explain it within that diagnosis doesn't mean that it's not transferable with other diagnoses, if that makes sense. So just a quick example, I'm going to be talking about a type called catastrophizing, and I'm going to talk about it in a sense of anxiety. However, it can also happen within a person who also experiences depression, if that makes sense. So it's not just a one size fits all. These can go with any sort of thing. So knowing that, let's dive into anxiety and distorted thinking. So first off, anxiety often arises when we believe that things are far worse than they really are. I often tell clients that we perceive things as a much larger threat in our brains and in our minds than they are in reality. And that is a major contributor to these distorted thinking types, right? And here are a few ways that it shows up. So one distorted thinking type is one called catastrophizing. This is your homegirl's go-to. This is for the overthinkers in the room. Catastrophizing is when a person imagines the worst possible outcome in every situation. So an example of catastrophizing would look like this. So let's say that there is a presentation a person has to give for a work conference. And they get in their head that if I mess this up, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to ruin my career, all my peers are going to hate me or disrespect me, kind of just leading to all these irrational, negative thoughts that aren't true, right? And this kind of thinking often heightens that feeling of anxiety because you're consistently anticipating the worst possible scenario, even in low risk situations or low stake situations. Another distortion type is overgeneralization. So this is when a single negative event makes you believe that it will always happen. So, for instance, if you fail a test, you might overgeneralize. We essentially say, just because I failed the test this one time, I'm always going to fail every test. Or maybe you got into a fender bender, whatever those like car accidents are called when you bump into a person in front of you. You may get into one just once, but overgeneralization is when a person takes it and runs with it. And they're like, every time I get into my car, I'm always at risk for this. Like, I'm always going to hit somebody every time I drive. When in reality, that's most likely never going to happen. Another way that this shows up is with a distorted thinking type called mental filtering. And this is when we only focus on the negative aspects of a situation, when we trap ourselves in this negative cycle of anxiety. So, and how this might show up is, say we get a performance review for our job, right? And they give us 90% of like, hell yeah, you're kicking ass. And maybe 10% of you could do better in these areas. A person with mental filtering is not going to pay attention to the 90% of their job and areas that they're kicking ass. They're going to focus on the 10% because the 10% is where they find that they are quote unquote failing or that they are failures. And so they hyperfixate on that and they filter out all the good stuff and they just focus on the negative stuff. So these are some examples of how this distorted thinking type can influence anxiety. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty, and distorted thinking fuels that uncertainty by making small challenges seem overwhelming. By fixating on these worst case scenarios and ignoring the facts, these thought patterns increase a person's stress levels and perpetuate the anxiety a person may feel. Distorted thinking can also show up in things like depression. Depression often involves feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, and deep sadness within a person. And distorted thinking plays a key role in feeding that, right? It's like a monster, it just wants to feed it. One way this shows up is in a distortion type called all or nothing thinking. And when a person engages in all or nothing thinking, they view things as either completely good or completely bad. There's never, or very little, is there ever an in-between of the good or bad. So how this might show up in a person with depression is they might think to themselves, I'm a failure, I can never do anything right, even if it's a minor setback that they experienced. And this pattern creates a sense of despair, which can then fuel a person's helplessness or worthlessness, and leaves really no room for nuance or growth. Another distorted thinking type within depression, or how it might show up in depression, is discounting the positive. So people who struggle with depression often dismiss any positive feedback or accomplishments. Being able to accept a compliment is a very high social skill, right? It's hard for people to accept compliments. When a person compliments us, we either want to deny it by saying like, oh, like, no, like, yeah, you like this shirt, it's fine, I just got it on my Meemaw's barn out back in the back or whatever, and it's like, it's nothing special, right? Rather than just accepting the compliment. Something else you might try and do, or a person might try and do with discounting the positive if they're receiving a compliment, is try to, reciprocate it back. Like, oh, I like your shirt. Oh, thanks. I like your glasses. When just accepting the compliment is all that really needs to be done. And this thinking, this discounting the positive thinking of, oh, they're doing that just to be nice. It doesn't really count, right? This thinking prevents a person from feeling proud of their accomplishments, for taking credit of the things that they kick ass in, right? Or the things that they do well in. And it keeps you stuck in a cycle of negative thoughts and reinforces that worthlessness that a person may feel when they're feeling depressed. Another distortion type that can fall within depression is personalization. So depressed individuals might often blame themselves for things that are outside of their control. And an example of this is, maybe say your friend is sad and they come to you crying, and they're crying about maybe they had a bad day at work or with a partner, and that person takes that situation, personalizes it, and says, oh, I fucked up. I'm the reason that this is happening for you. Like, it's my fault. I should have done this, or I shouldn't have done that. And this leads to guilt, it leads to shame. It's very blaming, and it really just feeds into that depression symptoms, when really, like, you didn't do anything. That was outside of your control. How could you have control over this person's day? How do you have control over this person's boss or this person's partner? How do you have control over this person? You don't. You don't have that much power. And sometimes that can be relieving when you realize, you know what, some things are just out of my control. Things that happen. They're not always great, and they can suck a lot of times, but doesn't mean that it was your fault. But when a person personalizes it, they make it believe that it is. Depression distorts how we see ourselves, how we see our relationships, and the world around us. And when we are unable to see those things for what they truly are, we reinforce the belief that life is hopeless, that we are hopeless, and that we are inherently unworthy or incapable, when that's just not the truth. Which kind of leads me into the last connection that I made with the distorted thinking. And distorted thinking plays a major role on our self-esteem. Our self-esteem is heavily influenced by how we perceive ourselves, and distorted thinking likes to capitalize on that and keep us trapped in this cycle of negative self-worth. So here's how it kind of ties into that. One of the first ways we do it is a distorted thinking type called labeling. So we'll label ourselves something negative, such as calling ourselves a failure or worthless, or even harmful, like even other things like fat, ugly, whatever that we may perceive as negative. And we internalize those negative thoughts as truths. And this can cause long-lasting damage to our self-esteem, because we start to believe that who we are is defined by our mistakes or our imperfections, right? Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean that you are a mistake, right? This also kind of goes into another type of distortion thinking type called emotional reasoning. And that's when we believe that what we feel is fact. Feelings are not facts. Just because you feel that you did something bad doesn't mean that you are a bad person. Something to think about is how we talk about ourselves as well, right? Like trying to recognize when it's an emotion versus when we're trying to identify with it. Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean you are a mistake. Another self-esteem distortion thinking type is should statements. Whether it's I should never do this, or I should do that, or I should always be successful, or I shouldn't do that so I can be successful. These different shoulds and should not hold us accountable to unrealistic expectations. It puts us in a place where we are judging ourselves when we say we should or shouldn't do these things, and we are setting ourselves up for failure, inevitable failure, because we are human and we are not perfect, and we cannot possibly meet expectations that are unrealistic. So we have to recognize when we are setting unrealistic standards and try and make it a bit more realistic so that we aren't feeling that sense of failure, that sense of guilt or shame because we are unable to meet these impossible standards we set for ourselves. So these distorted thinking types lead us to this hypercritical sense of self, right? We get on ourselves and overlook the positive qualities we possess. Humans can be rather cool. We can be very awesome. And when we view ourselves through this negative lens, it's harder to build a healthy, balanced sense of self. And we may consistently feel like we're not measuring up and feeling vulnerable to things like depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, because we are slowly diminishing our self-worth over and over and over again when we continue to perpetuate the cycle of distorted thinking. So let's talk a little bit more about that cycle, shall we? So I have kind of something to keep us in check here. So this is how the cycle may perpetuate, how it may flourish within us. So here's how it could start. It could start with anxiety, right? Maybe we're feeling anxious over something and it causes us to overthink the situation, which then leads to us catastrophizing. And this leads to avoidance or overcompensation, which can worsen feelings of inadequacy. And then that inadequacy can lead to low self-esteem, which may result from feeling like we're always falling short. And feeling like we're always falling short can lead to depression, which follows when these negative thoughts and feelings become overwhelming. And that's when the cycle can start all over again with the anxiety, right? Breaking this cycle can be difficult. However, it is not impossible. It takes a lot of consistency and mindfulness. Breaking the cycle involves learning to recognize distorted thinking and replacing it with more balanced, more productive thoughts. So I have a little scenario for you, and I'm going to use this scenario. And the distortion type I'm going to use is catastrophizing. So we have Sarah. Sarah just had a job interview for a position she really wants. She thought the interview went well. She answered all the questions, connected with the interviewers, and felt confident in her responses. But when she gets home, she starts overthinking everything. And these are the things that Sarah was thinking. This is how her distortion was showing up in her thoughts. So Sarah thought, what if I said something stupid? What if they didn't like me? I probably won't get the job. I'm never going to find a good job, and I'll be stuck in my current unsatisfying position forever. This is going to ruin my career, and I will be unhappy forever. Dun, dun, dun. No, girl. Reality check time. No. So, reality check. While Sarah may have made small mistakes during the interview, for example, maybe she misspoke when asked a question, or maybe she stumbled over a word or two, she can't know for certain how the interviewers perceived her, right? There's many factors that they may be considering, and one small mistake doesn't determine the outcome. In reality, she might have been a great fit, and they might call her, bringing her back for another interview, maybe even to give her the job. Or they might call her and tell her they decided to go another direction, right? But just because you made maybe one mistake doesn't mean that you are a failure. So in this scenario, Sarah was catastrophizing. She was making a situation much worse, perpetuating it, overthinking it. She was taking that and making the worst possible case scenario for herself, instead of recognizing the positive moments within her interview, right? And if she were to say not get the job, she could take that feedback and she could use it to improve herself later on. So now that we have this example, let's talk a little bit about how we can actually challenge these distorted thinking types. So how we can challenge it starts with first recognizing the pattern, right? So first we want to ask ourselves, okay, what distortion thinking type is going on here? For Sarah, it was catastrophizing, right? She was, making a situation worse by ruminating on it, fixating on it, and just going kind of down this rabbit hole of negative, irrational thoughts. So now that we know what was going on, we want to ask ourselves, okay, what are we thinking? What are we feeling? And what are we doing? And so Sarah was taking a situation, ruminating on it, and telling herself that she was a failure, that she is going to be unhappy forever, and that she's ruined her career. So then once you're able to recognize that, then you want to ask yourself some of the tough questions. Like, is this 100% true? What evidence do I have to support this? And am I catastrophizing, or am I thinking in extremes? So yes, she was catastrophizing. She was thinking in extremes. And she doesn't have any evidence to suggest that maybe the reason she did or didn't get the job is because maybe she made a mistake in an interview, right? I just made this scenario up. But those are some tough questions you want to ask yourself. Because when we're in this state of irrational thinking, we want to bring in rationale. That's why you want to ask yourself, okay, what evidence do I have to support this? What facts do I have to support this? Because it forces you to bring in logic when you're feeling highly emotional or highly irrational. So then, once you're able to do that, you want to bring in some cognitive reframing. And this is also an aspect of CBT. We want to replace the negative thoughts with more balanced, realistic ones. So for Sarah, instead of saying to herself or thinking, I failed, I made a mistake, and my life is ruined, my career is ruined, what she could tell herself is, you know what, like whether I made a mistake or I didn't, it doesn't define me. And I can take this as a lesson, as an opportunity to do better in the next interview. Right? Reframing that into a more productive thought. There's more that she can do with it. It's more productive for her versus being stuck in that negative cycle where she's just hyperfixating and worsening the situation, when in reality, it's really not that serious. So some practical tools that all of you can take with you and try to practice some of this for yourself is, one, journaling. Whether you want to get a cutesy little journal, some pens, or maybe you have an app on your phone or just the notes app in your phone, you can go in there and catch yourself going through that step, right? First step is recognizing the pattern. You can journal that out. Okay, boom, I was catastrophizing. Boom, I was labeling. Boom, I was in all or nothing thinking. Write it out. Write out, okay, what were you doing? Like, what was the distortion thought? And then rewrite it. So from I am a failure to I made a mistake. Or from, oh, everything is horrible, or that was just luck, or it doesn't count, to no, I kicked ass in this and this was great. Right? Just trying to challenge those thoughts by asking yourself, what evidence do you have to support this? Is this 100% true? Am I maybe exaggerating or going into a distortion thinking type? So that's one way you could use it, is by journaling. Another technique is called thought stopping. And this is when you interrupt a negative thought and replace it with a positive affirmation. So sometimes when I'm working with clients, if I hear them say something bad about themselves, and this most often happens with when they say should. If they say, oh, I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done this, I'll be like, oh, that's a judgment. Like, okay, how are we correcting that, right? Or, oh, you're judging yourself. What's a positive affirmation you can say? For every one negative thing you say about yourself, I want you to say 5 positive things. Because it really does challenge that brain chemistry and where your brain tends to go when you're in this distorted thinking type. So thought stopping techniques, those are some things you can try. The last practical tool I have is mindfulness. And mindfulness is when you bring awareness into your present moment and observe any thoughts or emotions you're having without judgment. Like most things in life, this is challenging to do, and with a little bit of consistency and your effort, it is not impossible. One of the ways that I like to do this is I'll have my clients maybe draw me an image and then I'll have them describe it to me. And whenever I catch them saying something negative or judgmental about it, I'll be like, oh, well, like without judgment. So maybe that's an exercise that you can practice. Go about your life, and if you catch yourself saying something judgmental to yourself, stop it. Stop right in the tracks. We're being mindful, we're stopping it, and we're going to do something different and correct that. So in summary, just kind of taking all that I've talked about today, I just want to bring it to this one point, and that is that we are all going to engage in distorted thinking from time to time, right? It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And recognizing these patterns is the first step to feeling more like ourselves and from freeing ourselves from this burden of perfectionism, right? We are human. We are imperfect. We are looking for progress, not perfection. But yeah, that's really what I have for you guys today. This episode was maybe a little bit of a shorty, but a goodie. If you want to know more about any of these specific distorted thinking types, let me know. Like I said, there are so many distorted thinking types. I did not even cover them all in this, but I did cover the more popular ones. But yeah, if you liked what you heard today, please leave a review, leave 5 stars, leave a comment, share with your friends, your family, with that negative Nelly that you know, have them challenge their negative thoughts. But yeah, if you want to get a hold of me, you can email me at life.motion24@gmail.com. If you want to get in contact with me through my socials, my Instagram is life.in.motion24. My TikTok is life_in_motion24. You can watch this episode on YouTube, or you can listen to it on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. But that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate every single one of you and for tuning in with me this beautiful Thursday or whatever day that you are listening. But until next week, embrace the chaos and find the beauty. Bye.